Rain Across Blackwater Harbour, Episode 2, Part 1. The Lantern on Grey Wharf. The rain returned to Blackwater Harbour on a Tuesday evening just as the last of the gulls were settling on the slate roofs and the tide was beginning its slow, patient climb along the stones. It had not been a storm at first, only a soft, persistent rain, falling almost straight down from a low grey sky, touching the harbour water with 1,000 small rings. It made the lamps along the quay shimmer, as if each one had been painted twice, once in the air and once below it, broken and wavering in the dark water. Elias Mercer stood at the upstairs window of his small house above the old net lofts and watched the rain come in. He had learned, after many years by the sea, that rain had more than one voice. There was summer rain, light and fidgeting, which tapped on glass like impatient fingers. There was hard winter rain, thrown sideways by wind, which rattled the doors and made the chimney hum. And then there was harbour rain. Slow, steady, salt-tinged rain, which seemed not to fall from the sky at all, but to rise from the water and settle over everything with a kind of memory. This was harbour rain. It softened the edges of the quay. It blurred the rigging of the moored boats. It turned the far side of Blackwater Harbour into a line of smudged roofs, crooked chimneys and dim yellow windows. Elias lifted his cup of tea from the sill and took a careful sip. The house was quiet behind him. The small clock over the mantel ticked gently. The stove gave out a modest red glow. Somewhere below, in the narrow lane that ran behind the old warehouses, a drain gurgled and settled. He had intended to spend the evening doing very little. There was a book open by his chair, a blanket over the arm, and a tin of shortbread on the low table. For once, no one had knocked at his door with a question about a missing key, a strange footprint, an unpaid bill, or a family secret that had been left too long in a drawer. Blackwater Harbour for a brief hour seemed willing to leave him alone. Then the bell rang. Not the church bell, not the harbour warning bell, his own front door bell, a small, uncertain sound. Elias turned from the window and waited. The bell rang again. He set down his cup, crossed the room, and descended the narrow stairs to the front door. When he opened it, rain blew softly into the hall. A young woman stood on the step, holding a dark umbrella that had bent slightly on one side. She wore a long, waterproof coat, the collar turned up, and her hair was tucked beneath a woolen hat. Her face was pale from the cold, but composed. "Mr. Mercer?" she asked. "Yes." "My name is Clara Venn. I'm sorry to disturb you." Elias looked beyond her, down the lane. There was no car waiting, no second figure beneath the lamp, only rain, cobbles, and the black backs of the harbour buildings. "You'd better come in," he said. She stepped inside and closed the umbrella carefully, as though afraid of dripping too much water on the floor. In the sitting room, Elias gave her the chair nearest the stove. She sat with both hands around the mug of tea he made for her, but did not drink at once. "I was told you were the person to ask," she said. "That depends what the question is." "It concerns Grey Wharf." Elias looked at her. Grey Wharf lay beyond the main harbour. past the fish sheds and the old rope store, where the quay narrowed and the houses thinned out. It was not much used now. A crooked wooden landing, a row of shuttered buildings, and an old warehouse with a roof that sagged in the middle. Fishermen tied up there when they had no better option. Children dared each other to run along it at low tide. Visitors rarely noticed it. "What about it?" Elias asked. Clara took a breath. "There's a light there, at night, in the top window of the old sailmaker's loft." Elias waited. "I know how that sounds," she added. "A light in a window. Hardly worth troubling anyone over. But the building is locked. It has been locked for years. There is no power connected to it, and the light appears only when it rains." Outside, the rain thickened against the glass. Elias sat down opposite her. "When did you first see it?" 3 nights ago. "And since then?" "Every night." "You've been watching?" "My uncle owns the building next door, the old chandlery. I came down to sort through some of his papers after he died." "I'm sorry." She nodded once. "He had been ill for some time. It wasn't unexpected. But in one of his notebooks he wrote something that I didn't understand. I thought it was nonsense at first." "What did it say?" Clara reached into her coat pocket and brought out a folded piece of paper. She passed it to him. The paper had been torn from a notebook. The writing was thin and uneven, perhaps done by an old hand in poor light. Elias held it near the lamp. "When the rain comes back, the lantern will answer. Do not open the loft after dark. The harbour keeps what it is owed." He read it twice. "Your uncle's name?" "Arthur Venn." Elias knew the name. Most people in Blackwater Harbour knew most names, even those they had not spoken aloud for years. "Arthur kept the chandlery open longer than anyone expected," Elias said. "Sold rope, lamp oil, hooks, bits of chain. I bought twine from him once. He never mentioned the sailmaker's loft to me." "Did he own that too?" "No, that's the odd thing. In the papers I found a key labelled Grey Loft. It was in his desk, wrapped in cloth." "And you tried it?" Clara looked down into her tea. "This afternoon, yes." "Did it fit?" "Yes." "What did you find?" "Nothing much. Dust, old canvas, broken frames, a few crates. No electricity, no lamp. Nothing that could make the light I saw." "But you did not go after dark?" "No." Elias handed the note back to her. "And now you want me to look?" "I want someone to tell me it's nothing. That is often what people want." "And is it usually nothing?" Elias gave a faint smile. "Not usually, but it is often less dramatic than they fear." Clara drank a little tea then. The cup trembled slightly in her hand. "It's there now," she said quietly. Elias turned his head toward the window. From his house he could not see Grey Wharf directly. The roofs blocked the view. He stood. "Then we'll go and look at it." The rain was heavier by the time they left. Elias took his dark coat from the peg, wound a scarf around his neck, and brought an old torch from the drawer beside the door. Clara opened her umbrella again, but the wind along the lane made it troublesome, so she folded it and walked with her head bowed. The harbour was not empty, but it felt as though it had forgotten its people. A few lights burned in cottage windows. Somewhere behind the fish sheds, a radio played softly. The masts of the boats clicked and whispered. Rain ticked on tarpaulins and ran in silver lines from ropes and rails. They passed the anchor rooms, where warm light spilled from the lower windows, and voices rose briefly as someone opened the door. Then they turned away from the main quay and followed the narrower path towards Grey Wharf. The harbour changed there. The neat lamps of the central quay gave way to older posts with dimmer bulbs. The stones underfoot became uneven. Nets hung from hooks beneath overhangs. The smell of tar, damp timber, and seaweed grew stronger. At the end of the wharf stood the old sailmaker's loft. It was a tall, narrow building of blackened weatherboard, squeezed between the empty chandlery and a storage shed that leaned slightly towards the water. Its lower windows were boarded. A faded sign hung above the door, the lettering almost gone. But in the top window, behind salt-streaked glass, a small amber light glowed. Elias stopped. Clara stood beside him without speaking. The light was steady, not electric white, not the flicker of a torch. It had the warm, enclosed glow of an oil lantern. "There," Clara said. "I see it." The rain ran down Elias's face and gathered at his collar. He crossed the wharf slowly, his boots darkening the wet boards. The building gave no sound, no movement, no sign of life beyond that single light in the top window. "Do you have the key?" he asked. Clara took it from her pocket. It was an old iron key, long and narrow, with a paper label tied to it by string. "Grey Loft." Elias unlocked the door. It opened with a reluctant scrape. The smell inside was old canvas, salt, dust, and something faintly metallic. Elias switched on his torch. The beam crossed a floor of warped boards, coils of rope gone stiff with age, cracked boxes, and lengths of sailcloth hanging from rafters like pale sleeping things. There was no light below, only the torch and the rain behind them. "The stairs are at the back," Clara said. "You came up here earlier." "Yes. Stay close." They moved through the ground floor. Elias's torch found a workbench with rusted tools, a broken chair, a stack of mouldering ledgers, and a row of hooks on the wall. Above them, the amber light still glowed faintly through gaps in the ceiling boards. The stairs were narrow and steep. Elias went first. Each step complained beneath his weight. The air grew colder as they climbed. At the top was a low door, already ajar. Elias pushed it open. The upper loft was empty. Not entirely empty, but empty of any person. No lamp stood on the floor, no candle burned, no wires ran to the walls. The window through which they had seen the glow was bare, wet with rain outside and filmed with salt inside. The torchlight moved across the room, rolled canvas, old sail hoops, a crate, a long table, a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. Nothing burning, nothing shining. Clara whispered, "It was here." Elias crossed to the window and looked out. From inside, the glass was dark. It reflected only his own torch and the vague shape of Clara behind him. He turned the torch away. For a moment, the room was almost black. Then the mirror glowed. Not brightly, not like a lamp being lit, more like light returning to a place where it had been hidden. The cracked mirror, leaning against the wall opposite the window, held a small amber flame in its surface. Clara drew in a breath. Elias lifted the torch again. The glow vanished. He lowered the torch. The amber flame returned in the mirror. A reflection then, but of what? Elias turned slowly, studying the angles. The mirror faced the window. The window faced the harbour. Somewhere outside, across the rain and water, there must be a light that struck the glass and bounced into the room. But from outside it had looked as if the light were inside the window. He stepped nearer the mirror. The surface was old and blackened around the edges. A crack ran from top to bottom, bending the reflection slightly. In the dim amber glow, Elias saw not only the suggestion of flame, but something behind it, a shape, a line of letters. He crouched. "What is it?" Clara asked. "Hold still." The rain tapped on the roof. Elias angled the mirror a little. Its wooden frame grated on the boards. The glow shifted, widened, and briefly sharpened. Words appeared, written not on the mirror, but on the wall behind him, revealed only by the reflected light. Clara came closer. Together, they read the faint letters, painted long ago in a color that had almost faded into the timber. Bell at low water. 3 knocks. Not before midnight. Clara said nothing. Elias stood slowly. "Did you see that this afternoon?" "No. You wouldn't have, not without the light." "What does it mean?" "I don't know yet." Outside, through the wet window, something moved on the water. Elias crossed to the glass again and looked down. A small boat was passing Grey Wharf. No engine sound, no oars visible, just a dark shape moving with the incoming tide, low in the water, slipping between the moored hulls like a shadow. At its bow hung a lantern. Amber. Steady. Then the boat passed behind the old storage shed and disappeared. Clara came to the window beside him. "Did you see someone in it?" she asked. "No." "But there was a boat." "Yes." "Could it have been drifting?" "Perhaps." But Elias did not think so. They left the loft as they had found it, closing the upper door and locking the main door behind them. On the wharf, the amber light had gone from the top window. The building was only black timber and rain again. Clara looked up at it. "You believe me now?" "I believed that you saw something. That isn't the same." "No," Elias said, "it isn't." They walked back slowly. By the time they reached the central quay, the harbour clock was striking 9. The sound travelled oddly in the rain, soft at first, then deeper as it rolled across the water. At the corner by the anchor rooms, Elias noticed a man standing beneath the awning of the old fish office. He was broad-shouldered, wearing a dark cap and a coat with the collar turned high. His face was partly hidden, but he was watching them. When Elias turned fully towards him, the man stepped back into the shadow of the doorway. "Do you know him?" Clara asked. "No." But there had been something familiar in the way the man stood, something almost remembered. Elias walked a few paces towards the fish office. The doorway was empty. Rain dripped from the awning. A cigarette end smoked faintly on the wet stones, then went out. Back at Elias's house, Clara paused on the step. "I should go back to the chandlery." "Not tonight. My things are there. They'll keep." She looked ready to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "There's a room above the post office," Elias said. "Mrs. Vale lets it sometimes. I'll walk you there." Clara studied his face. "You think something's wrong. I think your uncle left you a key and a warning. I think a light appears in a locked building with no lamp. I think a boat passed Grey Wharf in heavy rain without making a sound. And I think someone was watching us. That sounds like something wrong." "It sounds like something old," Elias said. The room above the post office was warm and plain, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and curtains patterned with blue flowers. Mrs. Vale accepted the arrangement without much surprise. In Blackwater Harbour, she had long ago given up expecting full explanations from Elias Mercer after dark. When Clara was settled, Elias returned home alone. The rain had eased a little. It now fell in a fine mist, softening the lamps into blurred halos. The tide was nearly high. Water slapped gently against the quay wall. Elias did not go inside at once. Instead, he walked back towards the harbour steps. At low water, the note had said, "Bell at low water. 3 knocks. Not before midnight." Low water would not come until the small hours. He stood listening. The harbour was quiet now. The anchor rooms had emptied. The last voices had faded into lanes and cottages. Even the gulls were silent. Then, from somewhere beyond the main quay, a bell sounded once. Not the church bell, not the clock. A smaller bell. A harbour bell. Elias turned towards Grey Wharf. The sound came again, one clear note in the rain. Then a third. After that, nothing. He looked at his watch. Not midnight. Not low water. Too early. Elias stood very still. Across the harbour, in the top window of the old sailmaker's loft, the amber light had returned. This time it was moving.